This is the WTF Bach podcast. Right, that work those fingers. The podcast about Johann Sebastian Bach, brought to you by his prodigal son, WTF Bach. Join WTF Bach as he guides your mind through a contrapuntal journey. Why don't you let WTF Bach guide you? And now, here's WTF Bach.
It's WTF Bach, Evan Shinner's here. Quick episode, I thought I should dash this one off while the repertoire is still fresh in my fingers. I performed the third Partita, among other Bach works, at a piano festival in Portugal last week. Muito obrigado, the Porto Piano Fest. And I want to talk about a particularly interesting revision, an alt take, if you will, involved in the third Partita. So the reason I'm bringing this to you is because it's more or less standard repertoire for keyboardists. If you're a pianist studying perhaps at university, you might play this piece. And if you do play this piece, you should play this particular variant in the final movement of the third Partita and set yourself certainly apart as a scholar and a studious keyboardist from the other players simply accepting what they read in the text. Why not accept what's in the text? Well, this is because no editions, to my knowledge, actually publish this variation that we're going to discuss today. Even the very scholastic NBA, yes, the Neue Bach-Ausgabe, has decided not to include these variants in the publication of the six Partitas. Christoph Wolff, the big bad Wolff, says, quote, "Inadequate attention given to copy G25 is to be especially regretted." So we are going to delve into copy G25 and examine exactly what is going on.
Hello and welcome to the WTF Bach podcast.
Wow, that's fabulous.
Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
So if we back up just a little bit, firstly, the Partitas. This is Bach's opus 1. This is the first collection of keyboard music published in Bach's lifetime. It's quite an undertaking to publish something. It often comes at the composer's own expense, as one has to hire someone to use copper plates in order to make prints. Few composers like Telemann actually made the copper plates themselves, but Bach hired people in order to make these copper plates. I've mentioned his published works were engraved on copper plates, meaning that someone cuts a mirror image of the music directly onto a copper plate. But now, and this is a pure side note, I'm learning that actually Bach's instrumental works were etched onto copper plates, which is not the same. It's actually transferring the musical text onto a copper plate with a corrosive acid. But I don't want to go too deeply into the issue of etching versus engraving with Bach's works. The point is, the Partitas appeared in 1731. Now, I'm going to put a link in the episode description to download the PDF of the original print so you can see the difference between a printed work versus an autograph copy drawn by hand. Anyhow, Bach himself will retain some of these prints of the music, as one does, and sometimes he even writes a few things on the copies. Now, this is called a Handexemplar, right? A Handexemplar is the composer's own personal copy of a printed, published work that he retains for his own personal use. And there are many of these copies. In fact, there are 4 copies in question, named sources G23 through G26. Now, the word on these copies, again from Christoph Wolff, is, quote, "It is not possible fully to identify the corrector who made these entries, yet the identity of the corrector seems entirely persuasive." Right? This is just scholarship's way of saying, this is Bach's handwriting. We just don't have our usual scholastic methods to say it's undeniably Bach. Okay. So if we recap, we've got Bach's Opus 1, his 6 Partitas for keyboard, fresh off the 1731 press, and he and his students have these copies. And during lessons or whatnot, getting ready for a performance perhaps, Bach has changed a few things in the printed copy, in the Handexemplar. So if you're a Bach player, all of these changes will be relevant to you, but I'm going to talk about the most extreme one, which is in the third Partita. The last movement of the third Partita is a Gigue. And jigs are often fugal in style. They begin with one voice dancing about, dancing the jig, laddies, and other voices usually pick up the tune in a fugue-like style. Here's maybe the most joyous jig of all time from the Gigue of the 5th French Suite. I've got some sort of a lute-like harpsichord-sounding thing. So the 5th French Suite Gigue begins. And immediately the second voice, right? Fugue-like. Third voice. Very happy. Here is the jig from the fourth French suite. Right, so we've got this theme echoed in a fugue and a third voice. And now, in typical Bach fashion, when the first half of the jig begins a certain way, the second half of the jig will be inverted. It's like Bach saying, oh, you enjoy dancing on your feet, do you? Well, now let's dance on our heads. Wham! The inversion of the tune in the second half of the jig. So this tune will become... Right? You see how they're inverted. If I play them at the same time, you hear the mirror... Right? You hear the mirror image. Melodies going in opposite directions. The fourth French suite jig, which is this, becomes... Right? So we've got right side up and upside down. Perhaps the most striking inversion in a jig is from the sixth partita. The opening subject sounds like this, very angular, very chromatic. So that, turned on its head, sounds like this. Right, so we've got right side up and upside down. And now at long last we come to the point, the jig of the third partita. It begins like this. Right, so we had voice 1, voice 2. We had a small episode where we're waiting for the third voice. And finally in the bass, here it is. Okay, so we go to the second half of the jig where we expect to find it upside down. Now, I promise you, open every single copy. The second half is this. Right, well, that sounds normal because didn't our theme go... And sounds like it's going upside down? But perhaps you noticed this even before this episode. Perhaps you did. That means you have a Bachian mind because it's not inverted quite exactly. Can you tell where? Here's right side up. And here's upside down. If you want to solve that or pause the episode or whatever and listen to that again, I'm now about to reveal where the inversion is not exact. It comes in the half step here. This half step. This half step. And when we get to the second half, we still hear this half step. Do you get it? The first half is going like this. This motion for the half step. And the second half, still the same motion. Right? They're both descending half steps, but that can't be. If it's a true inversion, one half step has to go this way, the other has to go this way, right? This inverts to this. So Bach noticed this. A little too late, it seems, because they've already been set down on copper plates. But you know, for Bach, nothing is ever done. No piece for him is finished. He's constantly in revision. He's in the workshop, shaving off a few more edges here, sanding the wood ever finer. He changes the inversion properly. It becomes an ascending half step. So the proper inversion is... What's more, because of this very slight adjustment, all the counterpoint that goes with it will change too. So, you know, it's like code. He's tinkered with this number at the beginning of the code, and then all the numbers further down the line don't add up, so he's got to readjust those too. So this is what source G25 is. It's Bach's writing the proper inversion and therefore all the counterpoint that comes consequentially with it in order to reflect this proper inversion. So I'll talk my way through what you have on the page and what Bach changed it to in source G25. What you have on the page, as we've seen, is this. But Bach corrects himself in the proper inversion to this. And the answer as well will also be corrected from this to this. And here's what I meant by the code. The left hand originally reads this. And if we are to leave that with the now proper inversion, we would have a clash here that sounds like this. And so Bach doesn't like this B flat with the B natural, so he actually changes the counterpoint now to this. Right, very subtle, however, just very reflective of the non-stop thinking mind of Bach. Now, the next few lines are the same in both printed and corrected versions, but when the third voice finally enters in bar 34, it has the corrected half step. And all this is the same. Notice this detail in the next few bars here, right? The printed editions sound like this. But Bach thinks, this descending half step, that's not what this second half is about. So he changes the descending half step in only one of the voices, and then we have this lovely contrary motion that sounds like this. Right, so it goes from the parallel thirds to the contrary motion thirds. And then finally comes the last few revisions, which to me is truly reflective of the sign that this is the authentic Bach. He makes even finer and quicker notes. Everything so far has been traveling in eighth notes, but in these last few bars here, Bach will actually create a bunch of revisions in 16th notes. So here we have one of our last entrances of the theme subject, now with the proper inversion and the proper counterpoint with it. Now it's coming in the middle voice again, hear it. If I were to play what is printed with that corrected middle voice, we would have another clash that sounds like this. So again, Bach doesn't like this F sharp against F natural, so he actually adds in these lovely little 16th note swirls that sound like this. And now here comes the theme in the bass again with the proper inversion. And if I were to leave the printed version as such, we would have another clash. And Bach doesn't like it, and he keeps again the swirly 16th notes coming in, so we have something that finally sounds like this. And then the jig is up. So I will play now the printed version of the second half, followed by the revisions in source G25, and I will put a link to the literature where you can find these changes mentioned and listed in full. Again, if you are a keyboard student, consider playing this revision to the third partita, and if you play the second partita, there's also a few revisions, none quite as drastic and significant as this one in the third partita. It's reflective of Bach's mind that is constantly in revision, constantly working things out and in search of that true perfection, in search of that wonderful design. Here is the second half in full as the printed versions would have it. now the revisions in G25. I hope you've enjoyed this. I will now let it play out with a MIDI version that I've created of the entire jig. Thanks for listening. Stick around for the next episode, which will surely be a bit longer than this one. Thanks.
WTF Bach. This is the podcast about all things VIP Bach, which is JS Bach, brought to you by WTF Bach.
Oh, Bach's art, the prelude to my heart.
Donate on PayPal, Cash App, or Venmo. All relevant links to PayPal, Cash App, and Venmo are found in the episode description. We would like to hear from you. Bach@WTFBach.com. Write us.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening.
right, unless you've not been done wrong before. And now the fantasy.
We've had no choice but to continue with the English suites for tonight's podcast.